What is it about this time of year, with the nights growing longer, colder, and darker, that sees me pulling Batman Arkham Asylum off the shelf for yet another playthrough? Arkham Asylum is one of a handful of comfort games for me. It's something that I can regularly revisit and replay without it losing its appeal or fun factor. It's also, in my humble opinion, a rare case of the first entry into a series being the best one. But what is it that makes this game so special? Why will I pop this disc in time and time again when I have a massive backlog? Full disclosure, this video will contain spoilers. This is a 14-year-old game, a realization that's just made me feel that much closer to the grave. And I'm assuming you've either played it for yourself, which, to be clear, I highly recommend. This is one of my top 10 favourite games, period. Or you just don't care about spoilers. We'll be deep diving the gameplay, the story, and throwing in a little version comparison for good measure. I have a long history with this game. I first played through Arkham Asylum on the Xbox 360 as a 20-year-old games art and design student in September 2009, shortly after the game's release in late August. Since then, I've returned for the separate achievement list in the Game of the Year edition. I'm sure we've all had that phase. Another revisit for the game's Windows Live version on an at the time very basic PC that struggled to run it before GWL got killed off. Thanks, Microsoft. When I later traded in my Xbox 360 for a PlayStation 3, I bought Arkham Asylum yet again, although surprisingly never finished that playthrough according to my PlayStation trophy list, something I urgently need to correct. I briefly played the Return to Arkham Remaster, but didn't get along with it for reasons we'll discuss in the version comparisons. And finally, for this review footage, I played the Steam version for the first time. All of that is to say two things. One, I don't think anyone has an excuse for not having played this game. It's been made available on everything, with even a Switch port due to release this December. Two, I can only assume that there's a very good reason for my repeated purchases and runs through the game. Make no mistake, I'm going into this with conscious biases and rose-tinted glasses. However, the higher I place this game, the greater the potential fall if it doesn't live up to those memories and expectations. The game has a solid premise. Batman is bringing the Joker into Arkham Asylum. The Clown Prince of Crime had just made an attempt on the mayor's life, which Batman thwarted. We can even read through that tussle in the Batman Road to Arkham pre-order bonus comic. Something doesn't seem right though. The Joker gave up too easily. This opening segment is brilliant at building tension, with a palpable sense of unease displayed amongst almost every character. As dark, cold, and foreboding as the Asylum's construction is, it's the Joker that's making people feel uncomfortable while he relishes his homecoming. Scattered lines of dialogue here provide some sinister foreshadowing for returning players, too.
What's up, Doc? Pencil me in for tomorrow at 4. We've got a lot of catching up to do. Oh, Frankie, you really should learn to keep that fat mouth of yours shut. It'll get you into trouble.
It takes some, but not all, of the sting out of having to sit through this nearly 10 minutes long, largely automated sequence on your second, third, or 100th run. While it does count towards their overall time, a lot of speedrun videos omit this sequence, starting at around 6 minutes and 40 seconds into the run. Briefly, and I do mean briefly, poking around their communities, they don't appear to have a reliable way to skip it, and the slow start can be discouraging to both runners and viewers. This is something they have to sit through every time they lose or reset a run. Understandably, this harms the community's growth and retention, although I'd be interested in hearing if I'm wrong about any of that. Batman's suspicions are quickly proven right, as the Joker breaks loose the moment he's out of the Caped Crusader's supervision. He reveals that he let himself get caught as part of his grand plan, and, as the song goes, the lunatics have taken over the asylum. Batman is now trapped on Arkham Island as the cell doors for everyone he's ever put away spring open. Complete chaos that has, in fact, been carefully planned and orchestrated. A perfect summation of the Joker. This is an excellent introduction to our primary antagonist that motivates the player to win, but the game doesn't stop there. Joker taunts and berates Batman, and by extension us as the player, both in person and via TV screens dotted around the asylum. He actively mocks us, daring us to come and put a stop to his plan, while enjoying every second of it. The vocal performance of the one and only Mark Hamill elevating the villain's playful sense of sheer sinister delight. I was actually surprised at how much of a slow burn the opening of the game is, and how long the tutorial lasts. Arguably, the game never stops introducing new mechanics or teaching you new things, but for my money, the tutorial doesn't really end until you first overlook Arkham Manor a good 45 minutes to an hour into the game. As soon as the Joker's free, you're introduced to Arkham's combat system. The East face button, so square on PlayStation, X on Xbox, and Y on Switch, attacks with punches and kicks. The North face button, so triangle on PlayStation, Y on Xbox, and X on Switch, counters incoming attacks. Meanwhile, a quick double tap of the South button, so cross on PlayStation, B on Xbox, or A on Switch, dodges away from or over the top of enemies. This is a rhythmic combat system that relies heavily on timing and reading opponents. In normal and below, enemies show an icon above their heads before attacking, but on hard mode, this disappears, forcing you to pay even more attention. Its surface simplicity belies its potential for engagement, being easy to learn, but hard and rewarding to master. Batman earns experience and can choose new upgrades as he levels up. These unlocks include powerful finishing moves that can one-hit kill most opponents. You can only use them once you've built up a big enough combo though, so you have to be playing fairly well. Another upgrade, Powerful Strikes, awards you 2 combo points for a single attack, but only if you time your hits correctly. The game makes it clear that this is not a button basher. This is a dance or a ballet of fists. The game then adds some variety by throwing in knife-wielding enemies who have to be stunned with the West face button, so circle on PlayStation, B on Xbox, or A on Switch, before they can be attacked. Likewise, enemies with stun batons who have to be jumped over with a double tap of the South face button and attacked from behind are also brought into the fold and mixed in with regular foes. Finally, Batman's own growing arsenal of gadgets can also be used to even the odds, be it a Batarang to stun a far-off baddie, or the Batclaw to pull someone off balance, although I rarely use these myself. This concentrated and limited pool of options almost turns fights into miniature puzzles that have thousands of solutions. It's enough to keep us on our toes without overwhelming or confusing us. It's a delicate balance that I think the expanded enemy and gadget variety of later Arkham games actually breaks. It's hardly surprising that every game of the era seemed to borrow from or iterate on this core combat system. You saw versions of it in Captain America, Shadow of Mordor, Mad Max, and can even still feel its influence in the recently released Spider-Man 2. Anyone who appreciates gaming history and major influences in the industry's zeitgeist owes it to themselves to play this distilled, original version of the winning formula. Of course, not everything can be perfect, and Batman Arkham Asylum does get ragged on for having very samey and uninspired bosses, both major and mini. Early on, you're introduced to Titans. These massive brutes can slam the ground, throw downed guards and enemies at you, and charge at you. The idea is simple. Wait for the charge, throw a Batarang to stun, dodge out of the way, letting the enemy hit a wall, and then get in there to attack. Some outlets would have you believe that every boss battle follows this pattern, often showing footage of the, to be fair, uninspiring Bane boss battle. It was one of the aspects I was least looking forward to when revisiting this title. In truth, the bosses are much more varied than that. Zsasz requires us to sneak up on him before he can kill his hostages, or, we could cheese it with a remote batarang. Scarecrow offers stealth side-scrolling platforming challenges. Poison Ivy is based on dodging her projectiles while tossing batarangs at her, like some kind of third-person, low-intensity bullet hell. And Killer Croc is a game of cat and mouse as we sneak around his lair collecting key items for progression. Even the Titan fights evolve, allowing us to ride on the back of a stunned Titan, something that, with good timing, can be chained by using one Titan to stun another, or simply be used to take out the regular mooks which often accompany them. Yes, the final salvo against Joker is a massive miss and a letdown. We will get to ranting about that, believe you me. But the general impression of Batman only having one type of boss is evidently not true. There is a decent variety here. Of course, Batman can't take every enemy head on. Armed enemies can shoot you down in seconds, with the game featuring a handful of stealth encounters. I find that there are two extremes to these. At the start of the game, your options and toolset are too limited to be overly engaging, but after a couple of upgrades, namely the inverted takedown and the sonic batarang, they become ridiculously easy. Stealth areas prominently feature gargoyles for Batman to sit on. From here we can activate our X-ray-like detective mode vision to survey the area and see exactly where the enemies are. No one ever seems to think to look up, it seems. If we have the inverted takedown, we can immediately take out any enemy who's stupid enough to walk under a gargoyle. Even better, we can then cut the foe down with a batarang to not only spook his friends, but reuse that same gargoyle for another inverted takedown when his buddies come to inspect the noise. The sonic batarang, meanwhile, emits a sound that attracts a guard. This is great for separating anyone who's travelling in a pack. We can walk them straight into an inverted takedown, or towards a wall that just so happens to be coated in explosive gel. Yeah, I will never understand how this results in someone merely being unconscious rather than outright dead. We can also use the upgraded backlaw to pull the floor out from under some enemies, and man, while there are only one or two opportunities to do this, it feels good. Similarly, we can use explosive gel to drop the ceiling on people, which is also somehow non-lethal. We certainly feel very powerful and smug, especially as the bad guys increasingly panic and freak out, but that behaviour also makes their movements harder to predict, in turn making them more dangerous as the encounter goes on. The game does a few more things to up the ante of these stealth sections. First, they add in stealth segments with hostages. If Batman gets seen, the hostage gets killed. This means that, while other stealth sections allow you the odd mistake or two, these segments demand perfection. They later introduce what the game refers to as guaranteed demonetization word collars. These set off an alarm when someone's heart rate drops below a certain level, making it impossible to take anyone out without alerting their friends. Of course, that also means we can guarantee that their backup will move towards our location, and we can set up traps like, oh, I don't know, proximity-sensitive explosive gel? The other thing the game does to counter us is less fun. Joker's men start planting bombs on gargoyles, forcing us to use other tactics. To me, that just seems like an admission from the developers that gargoyles make things too easy, with them asking us to, air quotes, do it properly this time. This is another area that other games would, feel inspired by, and we can still see its influence as recently as, once again, Spider-Man 2. Arkham sequels would also greatly expand upon this gameplay style, although in this case I'm more welcoming of the additional features City and onwards would bring to stealth sections. Asylum gives us a solid foundation, but it's admittedly poorly balanced and reliant on optional upgrades to add depth. Batman's detective mode vision has limited uses outside of stealth too. It can tell you how many enemies are in the area, help you locate vents and collectibles, and it's also used to set up crime scenes. As you might expect, crime scenes are somewhat immature in this game. You scan a single object, which gives you a trail to follow. Say it with me, the sequels will do a lot more with both these crime scenes and the visual mode as a whole. I found myself rarely using it outside of its mandatory sections. Not that it's stopped similar modes appearing in other titles, in a comparison that is in danger of outstaying its welcome. In all seriousness, I am having a fantastic time with Spider-Man, but it's proof that saying that Arkham Asylum had a lasting impact on the industry is definitely an understatement. One of the biggest surprises for me was how few mandatory gadgets are in Arkham Asylum, and how spread apart their unlocks are. Did you know that, unlike City, Origins, and Night, you start Asylum with just the Batarangs in your gadget wheel, and you don't get your first new gadget, the explosive gel, until you're about an hour into the adventure? Quick quiz. From memory, not counting the Batarangs and grapnel gun you start with, how many gadgets do you unlock in Arkham Asylum? And how many of those are mandatory for progression? I'll give you a few seconds. Did you say 4, arguably 5 mandatory gadgets and 2 optional ones throughout the entire adventure? If so, congratulations! You get the explosive gel, cryptographic sequencer, backclaw, line launcher, and finally, an upgraded backclaw. Hence saying 4, arguably 5, through story progression. Through level ups, you can buy the aforementioned Sonic Batarangs to break stealth encounters, and the remote control Batarang, which I've only ever really used to skip the second Zaz encounter, and unlock that one trophy for catching your own Batarang. You can also get twin and triple Batarangs, but all that really does is allow Batman to throw multiple projectiles at once, rather than being new gadgets outright. This felt really bizarre to me during this revisit. Contextually, Batman has just brought the Joker in after an attempt on the mayor's life, and you're telling me that all he has with him is a grapnel gun, Batarangs, and a currently useless cryptographic sequencer. It can't be selected or used until you get the security codes later on. That feels like he packed very lightly to fight one of his most dangerous foes. Granted, I suppose the explosive gel is in the Batmobile, so he might have used that when apprehending the Joker too. From a gameplay perspective, I understand it. You want to introduce these one at a time so that you don't overwhelm the player, and they're simultaneously how you slowly unlock access to more and more areas of the island, so you don't want us having all of these toys out of the gate. I just don't buy it from a story and character perspective. Another thing I don't understand is that Batman gets his Batclaw from a Batcave hidden on Arkham Island. He then gets the upgraded Batclaw from seemingly the exact same crate in the Batcave later on. Why not just take the full-powered version to start with? There was a really good opportunity to make this work too, to marry story and gameplay. When Joker's being scanned, it results in a red light because of Batman's gadgets. The guards could have asked Batman to hand over his equipment before continuing. Then, when Joker breaks free, his goons could have stolen and scattered the gadgets across the island. Imagine the comedic potential of a prisoner playing with one of Batman's toys immediately before Batman knocks them out and reclaims that bit of gear. The pacing of the game also leads to diminishing returns and reduced excitement for each new tool. Obviously, getting the explosive gel first means that you have more opportunities to use it, but by the time you're getting the line launcher and the upgraded Batclaw, the game's already winding down, and I actually struggle to remember many mandatory uses for either of them. The gadgets, slow unlocking of more of the map, how the environments transform and change over time, and mandatory backtracking have some people classifying Batman Arkham Asylum as a Metroidvania, which I'm in two minds about. The story itself is a surprisingly linear, straightforward, and guided experience. You're explicitly told where to go and how to get there at pretty much every turn. You don't have to remember where locked doors, inaccessible paths, and the like are. You don't often have to figure out how you're going to get somewhere. That's rarely part of the puzzle. My mind only changes, and the gadgets only see their full potential when you go for the optional Riddler Challenges strewn around the island. The first Riddler trophy can't be missed. It's one of a handful that are placed along the main progression path. The first riddle, where you have to scan something in the environment, is tutorialized with a phone call from Edward Nygma himself. The Riddler Challenges also reveal sub-stories and give backgrounds on this universe's version of well-known characters through patient interview tapes and what the game calls Chronicles of Arkham slates. A lot of the challenges can be knocked out as you play. The Joker teeth you have to destroy paint out the main path, like coins in a Mario or rings in a Sonic, because every single one of my videos has to have a Sonic reference. Most of the collectibles just require a little exploration off the beaten path or decent observation skills, while the riddles themselves appear on screen as you enter the area they relate to, giving a nice prompt. Getting all of them will require a second lap of the island once you're fully kitted out, in order to reach rooms you couldn't access before and might have otherwise had no reason to explore. This is where you start to see interesting combinations and uses of the various goodies in your utility belt. This is also the only Arkham game where I've ever bothered to do all of the Riddler challenges. The quantity makes them feel very achievable. From City onwards, there are so many of the things peppered around that it feels overwhelming and I quickly nope out. Helping keep the Riddler challenges firmly within scope is the size of Arkham Island itself. This is a very small, air quotes, open world that works to the game's benefit. The Asylum is, in many ways, the star of the show and a character in and of itself. The benefit of its compact size is that there are only so many routes we can take, meaning the developers can set up meaningful encounters along the way. All possible paths to our next objective will have a bespoke, handcrafted encounter to deal with. Later games are so much larger, with so many ways to traverse the environment, that all the developers can do is leave it to randomly generated mobs. In a similar vein, the small world means that the game is densely packed with small details, bespoke environmental objects, and ultimately feels handcrafted. It's very easy to navigate its all-killer no-filler layout. From City onwards, we have, as the title suggests, a larger urban landscape that we can practically fly around. We have large, distinct landmarks to navigate with, details such as specific shops for Riddler solutions, but we also have a bunch of streets and buildings that are just sort of there to fill space. Another thing Asylum can do with its more humble square footage is change and evolve over time. Some changes, like Poison Ivy's plants taking over the island, are huge and obvious, but there are also more subtle changes. Guards you talked to an hour ago will now be dead. There's a Joker sign that's slowly built and painted throughout the course of the adventure. Warden Sharp's statue gets vandalized. The world feels alive. The game doesn't have to tell us that the situation is getting worse as things descend into chaos. We can see it for ourselves. The downside, however, is that these changes, this evolution, is employed to mask some fairly obvious backtracking and recycling of environments. The game obviously wastes your time or sends you on fetch quests and wild goose chases to pad the overall length when it doesn't need to. For example, you go into the Botanical Gardens to find Joker's laboratory. While you're there, you encounter Poison Ivy, who tells you that you can find spores to create an antidote to the Joker's monster-making Titan formula in Killer Croc's lair. As you leave, you discover Joker has, seemingly on a whim, dosed Ivy with the Titan formula, making her more powerful and an immediate threat as she blocks the path behind you. An Arkham employee named Cash can tell you where Croc's lair is, but you have to return to the Arkham mansion from earlier to speak to him. Cash tells you that Croc's lair is under the elevator shaft in intensive treatment, which means another return to a past area. Once you have the spores, you have to return to the Batcave, another area you've already visited, to create the antidote. Finally, you return to the Botanical Gardens to defeat Ivy. While yes, there are some new rooms, and even the old areas you're revisiting are changed by Joker's takeover, Ivy's plants, and your expanded selection of tools, this is an extended section of mandatory backtracking that's very poorly disguised and a possible dropping off point for some players. Still, it doesn't come close to Devil May Cry 4 levels of reusing past stages. What this section does highlight is the unique visual identity of each area. There's a surprising amount of variety, considering the game takes place in one location. Arkham Island, and the asylum built on it, has a lot of history baked into its architecture. There are buildings new and old, with differing purposes and decoration. You can see where new technology has been retrofitted into potentially listed buildings. You have sterile treatment areas, imposing cells, dank sewers, and overgrown cliffs to contend with, just to name a few. They're all dripping with atmosphere, densely packed with detail, and offer environmental storytelling. Unfortunately, this sequence also spotlights some issues in the story's pacing. When you've defeated Ivy, a fireworks show starts, and a tannoy announcement invites Batman to come and settle the score with the Joker. The game very abruptly announces that it's time for the final boss, and all that's left is an optional fight at the party's entrance. It's one of the game's missable trophies, so I recommend taking everyone down. Another Titan battle, and an underwhelming boss encounter with the clown himself. Albeit a horribly mutated Incredible Hulk version that misses the point of the character entirely, but again, rant pending. This is the weird thing about the plot. A lot of the events seem incidental. Early on, we rescue Dr. Young and encounter Bane. Both of these fill us in on the Joker's plan. Dr. Young has developed Titan, a derivative of Bane's venom, the steroid that makes him a massive, unstoppable mountain of muscle. The Joker bribed Dr. Young into mass-producing Titan so that Joker could create an army of Banes to march on Gotham City with. But when Dr. Young wanted out, Joker got himself brought back to Arkham so he could have words with her in person. Once we've learned all of that, we essentially enter a good half of the game where we're just following Joker's trail, putting away various inmates along the way. We know Joker relied on and instructed Harley to waste Batman's time while he prepared the endgame party, but Mr. J also let a couple of other high-profile criminals loose as backup and insurance plans that just so happened to work out. Scarecrow's mind-bending sections are visually and technically impressive, even 14 years later. I would love to see a behind-the-scenes that breaks down how they pulled it off, especially on the hardware of the time. They're some of the most memorable moments in the entire Arkham franchise, let alone this first entry. There's a sequence where the game seemingly reboots itself. Batman is now the patient, and he gets shot with a prompt to use the middle stick to dodge. So, plug in an N64 controller? It appears on pretty much every top 10 fourth wall breaks video on YouTube, and I'm not limiting that to just fourth wall breaks in video gaming. Yet, when you consider Scarecrow's contribution to the grander plot, he's a relatively inconsequential time sink. The same could be said for Killer Croc and Poison Ivy. And when we do learn the Joker's plan, it's to infect Batman with Titan and show Gotham an unhinged, crazed, and monstrous version of their hero. He wants to twist and distort Batman, making him just as mad as the other inmates. I guess he figured the years of mental torment didn't do the trick, so let's go with something chemical. When Batman resists the Titan formula, and even uses the antidote on himself shortly after, Joker infects and transforms himself. This is Plan B. Make Batman desperate. Give him a situation where willingly becoming a Titan is the only way to win. But, of course, Batman perseveres and wins on his own terms. It's a battle of willpower, of conflicting philosophies, of Joker wanting to show Batman up as a hypocrite. He invites the news crews because he wants Gotham to see their Dark Knight in this new way. I'm not convinced that Joker had to become a Titan himself in order to test and achieve that. Joker isn't about physical strength, he's about deception, misdirection, and manipulation. Getting a final boss against a roided out clown would have been underwhelming, but half of the time you're not even fighting Joker, you're fighting waves of his mooks before pulling a showboating Mr. J down with the Batclaw. It's easily the game's weakest moment. While the main plot is a fairly basic story competently told, the stuff I found interesting about Arkham Asylum was the discussion around mental health care and its practitioners. Full disclosure, I have biases on this topic. I'm formally diagnosed as autistic, prior to that I had a depression diagnosis, I'm prone to overstimulation, and I'm socially anxious. I have had 20 years of various therapies, counselling, and treatments, and I have a monthly check-in with a local hub. I receive ongoing support at work, and am currently reviewing an occupational health and care plan with my very supportive employers. I'm also currently medicated. During my autism diagnosis, professionals explicitly told me that I would struggle to hold down a job, live independently, or maintain a romantic relationship. I was effectively written off. Despite that, I am nearly 10 years into a full-time salaried design career, 2 years of which involved working exclusively on mental health and well-being content. I have a mortgage, and me and my wife just celebrated our 15-year anniversary as a couple. We have 2 kids. I am crushing it. I tell you that so you can understand that I've seen the best and worst of mental health care firsthand. I've lived and continue to experience it. Though thankfully I am in better hands these days. Given my background, I can confidently say that while autism is not comparable to being criminally insane or a danger to yourself or others, recognizing that Arkham is an institution for said criminals, with its inmates being guilty of heinous acts. Case in point, a fire at Blackgate Prison saw Joker's men temporarily transferred to Arkham as the nearest prison with capacity. Many of Arkham's staff and facilities are also of poor repute, with sinister intentions and ulterior motives. Dr. Young is adamant that she can cure the Joker, not for the Joker's benefit, but to advance her own career. There's an entire building on Arkham Island where inmates are strapped into straitjackets and thrown into communal cages with electrified floors. Cash describes Croc's lair as something they don't enter and just toss food into every now and again. The Arkham Chronicles explicitly reveal Arkham, and by extension Warden Quincy Sharp, as looking down on patients, viewing them as, and I quote, animals that they take pity on. Even the way Arkham Asylum is constructed, with tall, imposing ceilings, limited sources of light, and cold brick and steel, exists to make people feel small, lesser, and vulnerable. Arkham is not a place of healing. It may even be doing more harm than good to its patients, and this seems to be intentional. The game's explicit and implicit storytelling, be that through the design of the environment, the patient interview tapes, or character behaviours, contain numerous criticisms of mental health care and its practitioners. Arkham's residents are viewed and treated as being lesser, and that generates the response we would expect. Interestingly, Dr. Young and Frank Bowles are meanwhile outright shown to be corrupt, to be deserving of being on the other side of those bars themselves, and throughout the story, they pay for that hypocrisy with their lives. I was a little frustrated with Dr. Young's death, given I had just saved her life mere moments before when Zsasz took her hostage. Although, I'm not sure how Zsasz was able to reappear for that encounter. At the start of the game, Zsasz is used as a stealth tutorial. We have to save a guard he's holding hostage by sneaking up behind him. When we succeed, a guard specifically says,
"Someone put this animal back in his cell."
Yet he's able to reappear in Arkham Manor to take Dr. Young hostage. He's clearly been roaming free for a while, as some of his murders are the solutions to riddles. One riddle explicitly mentions Zsasz by name, while another shows the victims have been posed in Zsasz's signature style. So that would mean Zsasz was freed by Joker, put back in his cell, and then somehow freed again? The game doesn't seem to explain it, and even the Batman Arkham wiki were like,
I don't know, but it's a bloody good question.
Let's say we've completed the story, solved all of Riddler's mysteries, and pondered my oversharing about the state of mental health care. What else is there to do? As we progress the story and solve Riddler's challenges, we unlock combat and stealth arenas. These ask us to gain certain high scores by achieving combos, using a variety of attacks, and not getting hit in fights, or taking out enemies as quickly as possible while meeting certain conditions in stealth maps. These are Arkham's gameplay distilled into its purest form, and there's something scarily addicting about it. It's not without its flaws though. The combat challenges demand precision. We know that we need the extra points from using a variety of moves, getting a perfect, unbroken combo, and not taking any damage. Sadly, we soon realise that Batman doesn't always target the enemy we want him to, that ground takedowns lock us into lengthy animations that open us up to attacks, and enemies can throw objects at us from off-screen. There can be a lot of frustrating restarting and trying again. The stealth encounters fare better as these challenge us to take out enemies in specific ways. It's a good way to learn some advanced tactics with plenty of room for error. We also don't feel the need to get a perfect run, as we can potentially come back for the other special takedowns later. Where the mode can get frustrating is that these high scores and challenge takedowns award up to 3 stars per map, with these stars counting towards 100% completion. That makes it feel more mandatory than it should, and while I have achieved it on the Xbox 360 version in the past, it's not a feat I've ever been keen to repeat. If we ignore their contribution towards 100%, it's a perfect mode for when we just have 5 minutes, or we want to relive some of the game's most memorable encounters without having to play through the entire game again to get there. It's not uncommon for people to spend more time in these challenge modes than they did in the main story campaign. Speaking from personal experience, it's also an excellent way to introduce friends to the series. You can put the controller in their hands, say this is what Arkham is all about, and feel smug as you watch them order their own copy right there and then. These challenge modes hide an important consideration for choosing which version to play, so let's get into it. The PlayStation 3 version might seem underwhelming at first. It puts in a somewhat muddy 720p presentation that's capped at 30 FPS. I'm not one for analysing frame pacing, dips and stutters, but the PS3 port gave me a largely solid and consistent experience. Playing Captain America for the copycat footage harshly reminded me that Sony's machine was rarely the lead platform during that generation, and it could have been so much worse. We also can't reasonably expect a PS3 game to compete with its 1080p 60fps PC counterpart. So, why am I wasting your time even considering the Sony release? It had exclusive content. At the time, the PlayStation 3 was the only place where you could play as the Joker, who had his own moveset, gadgets, and playstyle separate from Batman's. The return to Arkham Remaster, which you're seeing now, also included the Joker's combat and stealth challenges, removing one of only 2 things that the PS3 version had going for it. To be fair, you're not missing much. In combat, the control scheme means that Joker, like many of the Arkham series playable characters, feels too similar to Batman. The main differences are felt in stealth. Joker can't grapple to gargoyles, his detective mode is a gadget that locks him in place during use, and he only has 2 other gadgets. One is a remote control exploding set of teeth, while the other is a straight-up gun with a single bullet. That still leaves the PS3 version with outdated 3D that no one ever used. At least the glasses are kinda neat. I'll keep the PC section brief as you've been seeing it throughout this review. This has become my favourite way to play Arkham Asylum, and I don't know why I didn't play it on PC sooner. The higher resolution, improved frame rate, and overall visual boost over the console versions makes it a no-contest victory. The only issue I did have was with the implementation of physics. In short, physics gives enhanced physics properties to objects that otherwise wouldn't have them. This allows for paperwork to blow around and objects to be kicked away by our feet. When entering all 3 Scarecrow sections with physics enabled, the game consistently and completely froze up. It seems this is a fairly common issue going by the Steam community page, Reddit, and old forum posts. Fortunately, all I had to do was turn physics off for the Scarecrow sections, and then pop it back on. It provides some cool effects. I was always happy with the console's presentation, but now I've had the extra pizzazz of physics, I think I'd notice its absence and miss it going back again. Including the times where it messes up spectacularly. In October 2016, we got a re-release of Batman Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, plus all of their DLC, in the Return to Arkham collection for PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. I'm not sure whether to call this a remake, a remaster, or something else entirely, as the games were moved from the previous Unreal Engine 3 to Unreal 4. No doubt a significant undertaking. It's also fairly obvious that many of the in-game models and textures have been changed. Even the pre-rendered cutscenes have been remade with the new assets. Graphically, there's a lot more detail and it is fairly impressive, but artistically, it takes a different approach. Batman himself appears to be much younger now. The original had a Roger Moore vibe about him. He was a grizzled veteran of Gotham's streets. In the original release of Arkham City, a lot of those lines on his face disappeared and he looked much younger, despite the events of that sequel taking place after Asylum had, as sequels tend to do. This change was likely to bring his Asylum look in line with the rest of the series. That said, what did they do to his top lip? That thing does not animate properly, my word. Teeth for days on this guy. It's incredibly distracting in every single cutscene. I just can't get past it. The colour treatment as a whole is much more vibrant and saturated. This is what made me stop playing on release, as ridiculous as that might sound. I went on a rant about how they didn't understand the artistic vision, how my gloomy and foreboding Arkham Asylum now looked like a neon street party. A little older, hopefully a little wiser, and definitely more mellow, I can say it's a different take. It's not my preferred take, but it's also not as offensive as I once made it out to be. Says the man who just ragged on Batman's lips and teeth. There are a couple of things that do bug me though. For some reason, Arkham Asylum, even playing on PS4 Pro or PS5, is capped at 30 FPS when its sequel, on the same collection, is unlocked and can easily achieve 60. We know it's not a case of game logic being tied to frame rate because the PC version operates at 60 just fine, so what gives? The other is that this version of the game is locked on consoles. Sure, this isn't my preferred way to play, but PC gamers should at least be given the choice. It also means that these releases effectively die with their platforms. I'm sure someone has already ripped and preserved them, but it still seems weird, even commercially, to arbitrarily exclude an entire audience. It's not like they can't bring it to PC, it's the Unreal Engine. Half of the games on Steam were made in it. If anyone has any insight on this baffling omission, I'd love to hear about it. We know that the Arkham series is coming to the Switch. bar Origins for some reason. From the limited gameplay footage in the trailers, it seems like Asylum might be based on its Unreal 3 original, rather than the Unreal 4 Return to Arkham Remaster, which would be an interesting choice. The trilogy would have been out by now, and I could have included it in this video, but the game's release date was pushed back by 2 months to December at the last minute. It's always concerning when that happens. Time will tell, and this video will quickly become dated. If you're watching from the future, let me know how the Switch port turned out. Refreshingly, I can't really say that there's a bad version of this game at the time of writing. Who knows how well that Switch release will run though. You do have to pick and choose, there isn't one definitive version. I now prefer the Steam release. It's the original art style at a stable 1080p 60, and the physics effects, when used well, are a cool addition. I'm missing out on the Joker by playing on PC, but I was never particularly taken with his gameplay, and having access to him either means 720p 30 for the original aesthetic, or getting the new look and feel, which isn't to my tastes, still at 30 FPS, half the PC's performance. For me, the clown's not worth it. If I got that desperate, I'm sure someone's made a mod to add the Clown Prince of Crime to the PC edition. All said and done, this is one of the best games I've ever had the pleasure of playing, and something I'll no doubt keep returning to. Realising that I never actually finished the PS3 or PS4 versions has me wanting to immediately right that wrong. Things do go downhill for the Arkham franchise from here, in my opinion at least, and I am intending for this to be a Some Call Me Johnny style marathon, so be sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified when my Arkham City video goes live. Thanks, as always, to my Patreon supporters who are Crow, Tiny Jericho, Mr. Terry Chaos, Guma Spice, and Ducky Go. I presume I'm pronouncing all of those correctly. They haven't told me otherwise so far. If you would like to join them, see video scripts early, and get a special Discord role, links are in the description, and I greatly appreciate your support.